Good afternoon, guys. We are starting the chapter 11, and we have two parts of chapter 11. So today we're going to go over the first part of the endocrine gland secretion and action of hormones, part one. So we'll focus on endocrine glands and hormones background information, and then we will talk about mechanism of hormone action. We will go detail about the hydrophobic hormones, which is lipid soluble hormones, and we will touch base with the water soluble hormones. Okay. Then we will cover some structure of the pituitary gland and adrenal gland, thyroid and parathyroid gland, pancreas, and other endocrine glands in next lecture. Okay. So today, basically, we will focus on the background information and mechanism of hormone action, a little bit about the pituitary gland. Okay. So here, let's start with a clinical case. A 32-year-old man complained about a reduction of testicular volume and loss of libido. He had been abusing androgenic anabolic steroids, AAS, for 7 years to build the body. Genital examination revealed that both testicular volumes were reduced to 13 ml. Normally, the testicular volume is 23 ml. Endocrinological investigation shows luteinizing hormone, LH, follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, and total testosterone, total T levels are below the normal. So what is the pathogenesis and complication of this condition? So our body produce the androgenic anabolic steroids. Our adrenal gland, our gonads produce it. But if you take these things from outside, what happens? That will replace the natural steroids. And then the organs which produce it gonna go slowly regressing. And that's this case is. So we're gonna see how our body maintain the hormonal concentration and how it maintain the homeostasis of hormone through the negative feedback loop. Okay. So the endocrine system, the homeostasis in the body is maintained mainly by two systems of the body. One is endocrine system, and the next is the nervous system. Nervous system, we have gone over it, how the neurotransmitter of the nervous system control the function of the neuron and the function of other cells in the body. Similarly, the hormones also does the similar function. The only thing is neurotransmitter released in the form of neurotransmitter and then they bind to the cells or to the neuron, whereas endocrine hormones are produced by endocrine glands and that is transported by blood to the target cells where it binds with the receptor and change the function of the cells. And that's how it maintains the homeostasis of the body. So like normal blood pressure, normal heart rate, normal sodium level, normal calcium, normal magnesium, normal blood pressure, normal insulin level, normal glucose level, how these all normal parameters of our body is maintained within a normal range because there are two systems mainly working in the body. So nervous system, the neurotransmitter, and the endocrine system, the hormones. So the neurotransmitter and the hormones maintained our homeostasis of the body. Clear? Okay, so the once we talk about endocrine system, let's go a little bit histology of the glands. All the glands in the body, name it, like salivary glands, the pancreas, the thyroid gland, the sweat glands, the sebaceous gland, these all glands originate from epithelial tissue. Among the four tissues, endocrine glands originate from epithelial tissue. Then some of the glands develop ducts, we call them exocrine gland, and some of the gland do not develop ducts. They are buried inside the tissue. We call them endo, means inside glands. And the glands with the duct, which is exocrine glands, they produce their secretion products and transport through the duct to the body surface. Whereas endocrine glands, which are inside the tissue, they don't have duct. So whatever they produce, they send them to the nearby capillaries, to the blood vessels, and then blood vessel carry it all over the body, and then it will bind with the receptors on the cells, and those cells are called target cells. And the receptors are a specific receptor. That means certain hormone can bind only with certain kind of receptor. That's why hormones act only on target cell. For example, insulin, when released by your pancreas gland, it get into your blood, and then it travel all the way all over the body through the blood, but it can bind only with the receptor on the cell. For example, the receptor for insulin is on the plasma membrane of skeletal muscle cells, liver cells, fat cells. They can act only on those cells, not on the brain cells, not on other epithelial cells. That's why endocrine hormones binds only with the receptor. Neurotransmitter also binds only with the receptor and produce their effect. Clear? So that is the background information of the nervous system and endocrine system, how they control the homeostasis of our body. Okay, so let's go over endocrine system now. The endocrine system is a series of ductless glands that secrete messenger molecule called hormones in the circulation, means in the blood circulation. Okay, the circulating hormone then travel to the distant cell, and that binds with the target cells, which produce signal characteristic by physiological response. Okay, and when they bind, they produce particular physiological response inside the cell. So what are those particular physiological response in such cell? Once receptor binds on the cell or binds inside the cell, they control enzymatic reaction. Enzymatic reaction means they change the metabolism, they change the catabolism, anabolism of the cells. They modify the transport of ions or other large molecules across the plasma membrane. So they can increase the transports of sodium, transport of calcium, magnesium, they can block, they can increase. They can change the gene expression inside the cell. If the hormone get inside the cell and binds with the receptor inside the cell, they can change the genetic transcription, which is they change different, they produce different kind of messenger RNA, they produce different kind of protein. So they can change gene expression and protein synthesis. That's how those cell will produce different kind of protein, different kind of other molecules, and they can function differently. Okay, so that is the function of the hormones, endocrine system. They release hormone, hormone binds with the receptor inside the cell or outside the cell and change the function of the cell. Endocrine reflex pathway overview. So endocrine glands and endocrine hormones acts through the negative feedback loop, and that's why it acts through the reflex pathway. So if you see here, this is how your insulin hormone is regulated in the body as an example of endocrine function. So when you eat meal, you absorb glucose and your blood glucose increase. At the same time, your meal pass to the stomach, which restrains the wall of the GI tract, whether it is stomach or intestine. When there is a stretch receptor in the wall of your GI tract, carry the impulse through the afferent neuron, sensory neuron, to the central nervous system. And then central nervous system through the stretch or increased blood glucose ultimately activates your pancreas to release insulin. Insulin released from pancreas then come into ECF. You see here, this area is ECF, extracellular space, this area. ECF, this area. So insulin is coming in extracellular space, and from there then it get into your capillaries, blood vessel. This blood vessel then carry all the way to the target tissue. Target tissue are the tissues, or target cells are the cells which has receptor, specific receptor for that insulin. And then the cells, then target cell, increase glucose uptake and their utilization. And that's how they reduce blood glucose slowly, because they are taking from the blood. And then once blood glucose is within a normal range or below the normal range, then it gives negative feedback to the pancreas to not release more insulin. That's how negative feedback loop maintain the homeostasis of blood glucose, which is an example of hormonal function. Okay. Okay, so major endocrine glands in the body. The major endocrine glands in the body, in the head region, you have the hypothalamus, the master of the master gland in the body. Hypothalamus is controlling pituitary gland, which is the master gland of the body. Posterior to the epithalamus, we have pineal gland here, pineal gland, that is in the head. Then in the neck, you have thyroid gland. In the behind the sternum, there is another endocrine gland which produces thymopoietin, that is called thymus. Thymus are, you cannot see in adult. You can see in the newborn baby, children and baby. Then there is the gland above your kidney bilateral, that is adrenal gland. The pancreas, in the pancreas, you have some small area called islets of Langerhans, like here, pancreatic islets or islets of Langerhans. These are the endocrine gland which produce insulin and glucagon. Then in male and female, gonads, particularly testis in male and ovary in female, are another endocrine glands. These are the major endocrine glands. They produce hormone and maintain homeostasis of our body. So endocrine glands are ductless and secrete hormone into your bloodstream. Then hormones travel to target cell that contain receptor for that particular hormone. Hormones are two types. They are the hormones, sometimes they are neurohormones, because some of the endocrine glands are modified neurons and they produce neurotransmitter like hormone. For example, epinephrine and norepinephrine produced by adrenal medulla, inner part of the medulla, are like epinephrine, norepinephrine neurotransmitter. That's why we call them neurohormone. So epinephrine and norepinephrine can be hormones or can be neurotransmitter. If postganglionic neuron release the epinephrine and norepinephrine, we call it neurotransmitter. But if the same chemical compound, chemical messenger released by adrenal medulla, then we call them hormones. What is the function? Same function. Both of them are released during the flight and fright under the influence of sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so neurohormones are secreted into blood by specialized neurons, and hormones affect metabolism of target cells. We did that. Here are some other endocrine glands and their target hormones. You go over them, but you are not responsible for all of them. We're going to go about most of them one by one. So you will be responsible for only the hormones which we are covering. Okay. Okay. Now, chemical classification of hormones. So hormones are chemical messenger, but they are made up of chemical compounds. And that's why we can classify them into different group of chemicals. Okay. So some hormones are amine hormones. Amine hormones are derived from amino acids. Amino acids are mainly either tyrosine or tryptophan. So these are the essential amino acids, which are tyrosine and tryptophan. Hormones which are made from tyrosine or tryptophan and are amine hormones are norepinephrine, epinephrine, thyroxine, and melatonin. Some hormones are made up of long chain of amino acid called polypeptide or protein. And these hormones are chain of amino acids or they are whole protein. For example, antidiuretic hormone, growth hormone, insulin hormone, oxytocin, glucagon, ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, PTH, parathyroid hormone, or some of the hormones are composed of protein as well as glucose. That's why we call them glycoprotein. So glycoproteins hormones are composed of protein and glucose, and they include luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay. These protein and peptide hormones, amine hormones, are usually water-soluble hormones. Glycoprotein hormones, some of them are water-soluble, some of them are fat-soluble too. Whereas steroid hormones, which are totally made from fat, cholesterol, are lipid derived, and that's why they are not water soluble. They are hydrophobic. These hormones are hydrophilic. They are lipophobic basically. Okay, so steroid hormones are lipid derived from cholesterol, which is fat, and they are testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, aldosterone, and cortisol. Okay, so these are the, so let's see here. Before we go to mechanism of action, I want you to, and listen here, I'm going to pick some of you if you are paying attention, and I'm going to ask you a question. So first, second, third, these most of the hormones are water soluble hormones. That means can they enter cell easily or they will have a hard time entering the cell?
Hard time.
Hard time.
They will have a hard time entering the cell because water soluble hormones have domains which have charge, negative charge, and the phospholipid bilayer inside the plasma membrane always make harder for the water soluble hormones. So these hormones cannot get inside the cell easily. They need some carrier to take inside. Whereas steroid hormones can easily pass through the plasma membrane and they can get inside the cell in your cytoplasm. That's why receptor for these three group of hormones are on the plasma membrane of the target cell, whereas the receptor for steroid hormones have their receptor target receptor inside the cytoplasm. Okay. There is other way of classification of hormones. Okay. So classification of precursor of active peptide hormones. So when a cell make a hormone, like any endocrine glands are group of cells. So when cells make a hormone, there is several stages of hormones. Hormones are either protein, glycoprotein, or lipid. So there is like early stage, middle stage, late stage. And based on that, whether they are active or inactive, we can divide the hormones into pre-hormones, pro-hormones, and hormones. Okay. So some of the hormones are called pre-pro hormones or precursor of pro hormones. For example, pre-pro insulin. Pro hormones are precursor of active hormones like proinsulin are precursor of insulin. So pro insulin is inactive, whereas insulin is active. Okay. Sometimes we call prohormones even the real hormones, which is released from the glands and still circulating, but they are not active. For example, thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones are T4 and T3. Only T3 hormones are active hormones. So let's see when thyroid gland cells produce hormone, they are released from the thyroid gland, get into your blood, still T4. They are still pro-hormone because they are inactive hormone. Once it binds with the cell and get inside the cell, cytoplasm, then enzyme inside the cytoplasm convert T4 into T3. And then can T3 produce its effect like active hormone. That's why T4 is prohormones. But most of the prohormones are not even released from the glands. Okay. So let's see the one of the example of hormone when they binds with a specific receptor, how they work. So insulin action, this is the most common hormone we have to. And if you guys presenting on the uh, diabetes type 1 or type 2, you have a lot of information resource here from this endocrine system. Okay. So when you eat carbohydrate and protein rich food that absorbed from your GI tract and get into your blood, that blood takes to your pancreas. In the pancreas, you have beta cells. Beta cell take that glucose inside the cell, and then glucose activate beta cell to produce insulin. Once insulin released from your pancreas into blood, then it circulates into your body, and then it binds with the specific receptor for the insulin on skeletal muscle, fat cell, and what is third one?
Liver cells?
Liver cell. Very good, liver cell. So they bind on those cells. So here you go. So this plasma membrane is one of them. And here is insulin receptor. What are receptors are made up of any cell in plasma membrane? You know, receptors are transmembrane protein. Yes. Do you know integral protein? So receptors
Yes.
are integral protein. They are transmembrane protein. It had extracellular domain and it has intracellular domain. Extracellular domain are have the receptor. So this is insulin receptor, and then it spans through the plasma membrane, and intracellular domain has the domain which binds with several things. So once insulin released, it binds with the specific receptor on those three cells. And once this binds, they change their structure. And then they phosphorylates the receptor. So these phosphorylation and dephosphorylation, then there are several steps we're going to talk about how they work in they change, like activate second messenger, like they activate second. This is the, like, receptors are the first messenger, and inside everything is second messenger. So they change the second messenger inside the cell. Like, we did not do intracellular cytoplasm. This is basic biology you have done maybe in other 15 or basic biology. So there are several intracellular function, like they activate second messenger, like the cyclic AMP, uh, phospholipase C, kinase enzymes, and then all that stuff. Okay. So once they are activated, they phosphorylate other proteins, and phosphorylation and dephosphorylation makes them active. So these then activates the signaling molecules, these signal molecules. What they do, they translocate these channels, glucose channels in the plasma membrane, because these cells, skeletal muscle cells, fat cells, and liver cells are making these protein inside, and they are holding them here as a vesicle. Then they translocate them in the plasma membrane. And when they translocate, these are which protein? These are GLUT4, glucose transporter 4. And once they put channels, then glucose can easily get inside the cell. And then this cell then use this glucose to make ATP, and you reduce blood glucose. Okay. So insulin stimulates glucose uptake by means of glucose 4, GLUT4. This is a kind of transporter protein. Second messenger causes vesicle containing GLUT4 transporter to be inserted into the plasma membrane, and then increase the transport of glucose into the cell. Okay, now the steroid hormones. Simplified biosynthetic pathway of steroid hormone synthesis. So steroid hormones synthesized from cholesterol, means they are synthesized from fat. So here you go. You have a cholesterol molecule here, biochemical structure of the cholesterol. Then cholesterol with several enzymes change into pregnenolone. And these pregnenolone then, where these things happen, these all changing in the adrenal cortex and in the ovary. They make progesterone, and this adrenal cortex makes cortisol, hydrocortisone, and mineralocorticoids. You see, androstenedione, testosterone from the testis, and then estrogen and progesterone from ovary ultimately. And then they secrete into the blood. So basically, idea is they take cholesterol and make these hormones and then put into your blood. Okay, so that is how the hormones act and how hormones are synthesized by different endocrine glands. Mechanism of action of hormones. So a hormone can act only when they bind with the target cells. Okay, target cell receptor. Receptors are specific. Okay, so target cells receptor are very specific. Okay, they have specificity. That means they can bind only with certain kind of receptor. Insulin receptor will bind with insulin, not with estrogen. And estrogen receptor will bind with estrogen receptor, estrogen, not with insulin receptor. They have high affinity. Each hormone has strong attraction to that particular receptor. Low capacity for hormone. Even a lower concentration of hormone can bind with available receptor. Okay. Lipophilic, lipophilic means hormones which is fat soluble, have receptor in target cytoplasm and or inside the nucleus because they can diffuse through plasma membrane easily. Their target, that's why, is the nucleus where they affect transcription. That's why the lipophilic hormone can change the genetic transcription of your cell. Whereas the water soluble hormone, which is hydrophilic, they binds with the receptor on the plasma membrane and they can change only second messenger activity inside the cell and can change the biochemical metabolism inside the cell. So the function of hydrophilic hormone, the lipophilic hormone, change the gene function. That's why their action is called genomic action. And it takes time for that hormone to go inside and produce its effect. It takes like half an hour, 1 hour. Sometimes it takes week and months to produce effect. That's why steroid hormone uh, takes long time to produce its effect. If any of you have taken a steroid hormone from outside, sometimes we take steroid hormone for suppression, the suppression of the inflammation as medication like cortisone, prednisolone, those hormones, and doctor prescribe you for like a month. Then what does doctor do? Doctor will not ask you to stop that medication immediately. Like antibiotic, done, stop today. But these steroid hormones, you will not do that. You will taper down slowly. So doctor will ask if you are taking 3 times daily, then doctor will ask, take 2 times daily for a week, then 1 time daily for a week, then skip 2 days a week, then it's 3 days a week, then 1 day a week, and then slowly stop it. Do you know why? Because those hormones are taking job of your normal uh, body function. And to bring that body function back, you have to slowly remove the exogenous hormone so that your endogenous endocrine system can take over normal function. Otherwise, all of a sudden you block exterior hormone and your endocrine system are not ready to do that job and you will have lack of that particular hormone and that will cause several bad effect in your body. Okay. Okay, so receptor for hydrophilic hormones are on the surface of target cells. These act through second messenger and effects are quick. Some steroid also can act through cell surface receptor called non-genomic actions. So lipophilic hormone has main effect inside the cell because their receptors are either in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus. That doesn't mean they don't have receptor outside the cell. They have receptor on the cell surface too. Okay, and if they do bring the effect of that hormone by binding on the receptor on the surface of the cell, then we call non-genomic action of the steroid hormones. Okay, so here the mechanism of steroid hormone, that means this is the mechanism of lipophilic hormone or hydrophilic hormone.
Lipo.
Lipophilic
Lipophilic.
lipophilic hormone. So here you go. Lipid hormone travel in blood attached to carrier protein. So you see, this is the lipid hormone, H, and carrier protein is binding with this hormone in your blood. And then this is carried up to the target cell. You see target cell here? They dissociate from carrier protein to pass through plasma membrane target. So they dissociate, this hormone is dissociating. Receptor are now nuclear hormone receptor because they are binding to the inside the cell receptors. So this hormone is binding now with the nuclear hormone receptor. Now this nuclear hormone receptor is binding with the hormone, and then it translocate the hormone towards the nucleus, and then inside the nucleoplasm through the nucleopore. And then you see nuclear hormone receptor has two domain. One side is hormone binding domain, and this side is DNA binding domain. Once hormone with nuclear hormone receptor binds with the DNA through the DNA domain of the receptor, that changes the transcription of that particular section of the code. And when they change the transcription, they produce specific messenger RNA. Then messenger RNA comes outside the nucleus, inside the cytoplasm, goes to the ribosomes, and then they synthesize protein, and that specific protein then inside the cell and outside the cell bring steroid hormone response. This is the mechanism of steroid hormone. So let's see if you have testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, corticosteroid, they all act through this mechanism. Clear? We're gonna go a little bit deep here, how they change the gene function. Okay. Okay. So let's see. Start from here. This is square structure is what? This is DNA binding domain or hormone binding domain of the receptor.
DNA binding.
DNA binding domain. So let's see here. Now this is the DNA section of the DNA. On the section of DNA, not all the genes are expressing gene. There are exon and the introns and exons. Do you know that? Only exons express, not the introns. Okay. So this target gene is here, and for every target gene, there is hormone response element site where hormone binds. Okay. So here is the receptor protein to steroid hormone binding domain, ligand binding domain or hormone binding domain, and DNA binding domain. So once this hormone binds with this receptor, they bring here, and there is two sites, hop sites. Each hop sites bind with one DNA binding domain of the receptor. And then these two domain bind together and form the dimers. That is called dimerization of the receptors. One, they bind together, forms the dimer, then they activate the adjacent gene, and then genetic transcription, messenger RNA, protein synthesis from there proceed. Okay. So this is forming the dimers. These dimers are homodimers or heterodimers. Homo means same, homosexual, same sex marriage, homo. They are same hormone, so we call them homodimers. But not all the time hormones to produce their effect, they are homodimers. These receptors sometimes binds with a different kind of hormone half sites and hormone response. So here you go. It's the same detail here. Let's see the same thing with the thyroid gland now. So thyroid gland produce thyroid hormone. I'm going to come back to thyroid gland, but I want to see thyroid hormone is another hormone which have intracellular receptors. So when thyroid gland get inside your cell, and when it binds with the hormone, you see, this is the thyroid hormone receptor inside the cell. It has hormone binding domain, and this is DNA binding domain. Okay. This is another one. So here is thyroid. Thyroid hormone receptor is binding here. And then this domain is binding with the DNA. Here is 9-cis-retinoic acid. This is derivative of vitamin A. Vitamin A is like a hormone. It also binds with the similar receptor. You see? Now both 9-cis-retinoic acid binding with this receptor and thyroid hormone receptor binding with thyroid T3 triiodothyronine, and in one half side T3 with receptor binds, and another half the side 9-cis-retinoic acid vitamin A binds with, and they form the dimers, which is dimerization. Now, in case of thyroid hormone, you see dimer forming on the two half sides are not homodimers. They are heterodimers. Are you following me? But once they bind, what they do, they produce the same response, hormone response. Change in genetic transcription and messenger RNA. So if I say, let's see if I take vitamin A totally from your blood, will thyroid hormone act? Will it produce its effect? No.
No.
But other hormones don't need retinoic acid. So this is the case. Sometime there is heterodimers formation, sometimes there is homodimer formation. For two example, thyroid hormone binds with the receptors and the hormone release, the hormone response element to the hepatides. So thyroid needs heterodimer, whereas steroid needs homodimer. Okay. Here you go. Mechanism of thyroid hormone. Thyroid release 90% T4, which is inactive pro-hormones, and 10% T3. 99.96% of T4 in blood is bound to carrier protein, which is called thyroid binding globulin, TBG. Do you remember? In blood, plasma protein, we have three kinds of protein. What are those 3 points? Albumin, globulin, and fibrinogen. So this is one globulin, which binds with thyroid hormone and carry your hormone. That's why we say plasma proteins carry hormones and lipid. Only free thyroxine and T3 can enter cells. Okay. Protein-bound thyroxine serve as reservoir. T4 converted to T3 inside target cells, and T3 then binds to receptor protein located in the nucleus, which is here we talked about. Okay, so up to now we have talked about how lipid-soluble hormones, lipophilic hormones acts and produce its effect. So lipophilic hormones get inside your cell, binds with the DNA, change the DNA genetic code function, and produce messenger RNA, different protein production, and change the function of the cell. Whereas mechanism of action of water-soluble hormones are different because they cannot enter the cell. So what they do, before I go over it, I want you to read here in this diagram from number 1 to number 6. and then I will explain so you understand, because there is a lot in the book and I'm like combining them all in one. Okay, so let's read it. Water-soluble hormones bind to receptor on the exterior surface of the target cells. So here, the hormone receptor complex activates membrane protein called G protein, which activates adenylate cyclase, an enzyme, phospholipase C, an enzyme, tyrosine kinase, an enzyme. And once they activate these enzymes that not altered, let's change this, alters.
Dr. Shaw,
Enzyme activity mediates the target cell response. Yes.
is that similar to the G protein that was used in some of the taste
Yes.
mechanisms? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Is that the
Okay.
same one or is it a different
No,
one?
no, no. There is several kind of G protein.
Okay, but they're all kind of similar in that they act as that like
Yes.
second messenger.
Yeah. Okay. So first, let's see what is first messenger and what is second messenger. So first messenger are anything the messenger, like your hormones, your receptors are first messenger because they are outside the cell. So extracellular things are first messenger. And when that message is transported to another messenger inside the cell, they are called simply second messenger. Clear? So when hormone are released by endocrine gland, then they are in the blood capillary. From the blood capillary, they come into extracellular space. Once they are in the extracellular space, they bind the binding of the hormone to the first messenger to its receptor. Yeah. So this is receptor is the first messenger. This hormone is also first receptor. So this hormone now binding with the receptor. You see, receptor is attached, bound to another protein, which is subplasma membrane protein. And this protein is called G protein. And this G protein has several subunits. They are attached to each other. So when you see in detail, what do you see? Like in our body, everything is protein basically. Everything is happening with the play of the protein. Now you see this G protein, the blue one, is attached to another protein called enzyme adenylate cyclase. Once this water soluble hormone binds with the receptor, that activate the G protein, and then the domain, the structure of the G protein change conformation, and change in conformation activate the enzyme protein adenyl cyclase, and that enzyme then dissociate or catalyze ATP and release phosphate and forms cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP is one of the major second messenger inside the cell. Once second messenger cyclic AMP is formed, what does this cyclic AMP do? So activated adenyl cyclase converts ATP to cyclic AMP. Now cyclic AMP then, what does cyclic AMP do? Cyclic AMP serve as a second messenger to activate protein kinase. You see protein kinase. Protein kinase is another enzyme inside the cell. That enzyme is activated, and activated protein kinase then, what does it do? Protein kinase then activated protein kinase phosphorylate cellular protein. So now cellular protein is getting phosphate molecule from this ATP because this ATP is converting into ADP. So it is getting phosphate. Now, once protein is phosphorylated, what does this activated phosphorylated protein do? Protein can be enzymes or protein can be anything. Now, this protein activated phosphorylated protein can become activated enzyme, can activated the pump, receptor, transporter, anything, and can change the function of the cells. Millions of phosphorylated protein cause reaction that produce physiological response of these particular cells. But will this be happening forever? No. There is another enzymes in the cell. Phosphodiesterase inactivates cyclic AMP. So phosphodiesterase enzyme then activates cyclic AMP and the inhibit this function. So once this function of protein kinase is done, then that gives negative feedback, and then phosphorylatase enzyme is activated, phosphodiesterase enzyme, and shut off this function. Okay. Similarly, the three major second messenger which bring about the function change inside the cells are cyclic AMP. See, so which they cyclic AMP through the adenylate cyclase. Then another is phospholipase C enzyme. Instead of adenylate cyclase, there is another enzyme, phospholipase C, tyrosinase kinase. These all enzymes ultimately phosphorylate protein and then they activates the cells. I don't want you to go in detail. This diagram is not in our book. They are broken into different for the adenylate cyclase, phospholipase C, and tyrosinase kinase differently. Okay. I want you to know this, but you're not going to be responsible for learning all from the textbook. Okay. Okay, let's talk about now the glands. Oh, we cannot do the glands now here. Okay, so I will stop here and I will talk about these things in next class.